Submission. It's a dirty word. Or is it really? We're going to talk about that today. You know, we don't like to talk about submitting. It brings up a lot of negative connotation, doesn't it? When we think of the word submission, we think of dominance and power and being controlled, maybe even slavery. And as women, we certainly don't like the idea of being told that we need to submit to our husbands, because we can tend to think that means they are more important than us, that we're not equal to them, that they're above us, all of that kind of stuff, right? And in this age of female empowerment, talking about submitting is like, it's like the opposite of female empowerment. And so we can't have that. We don't want that. Submission is absolutely essential in a healthy relationship. And submission is essential to the functioning of our society. So let's talk about what the word even means first. This idea that submission is somehow a lack of equality is completely not true. Submission is actually a voluntary yielding to somebody or something, okay? We're going to talk about some examples outside of a romantic relationship, and then we'll pull it into that context. So the reality is that our whole society is built on the premise that we voluntarily yield ourselves to each other. For example, do you not yield yourself at work when you go to your job? I can't imagine for 1 second that you go to your work and say, I know you're the boss, but I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to do anything that you say because you don't get to be over me. You don't get to tell me what to do or what not to do. So I'm going to come in when I want. I'm going to leave when I want. I'm going to take as long of a break or lunch hour as I want. I'll turn my work in when I feel like it, and you don't get to say otherwise. If we did that, how long would we have a job? Not very long, right? No boss is going to be okay with us having that kind of attitude. So when we get hired by a company or by an individual, we know that we have to submit ourselves to their authority, right? Because they're the ones in charge. They're the ones giving us our paycheck. Okay. Organizations within our society function on this premise. The military functions on the premise that there is a hierarchy of authority and that there are ranks within that organization, and we submit to a higher rank, right? That's the whole premise behind the military. If you go to a specialist for some sort of diagnosis, do you not yield yourself to the expertise of that diagnostician, whoever they may be? A cardiologist, a pulmonologist, whatever that specialist is. Do you not submit to their expertise, their knowledge, their wisdom? Or do you try to argue with them? Do you say, I haven't had any training in this, but I think you're wrong. I think you don't know what you're talking about. So I'm just going to do what I want. No, the whole point of going to a specialist is that you believe that they are the experts. So you're going to voluntarily yield yourself to their knowledge. And if you want to get a second opinion, you get a second opinion. But at some point, you're going to do what the experts tell you to do, or you're not. But it's voluntary. You have a choice. Let's look at one more example that doesn't have to do with us submitting to an individual per se. Every time you get behind the wheel of a car and you drive, you are submitting to certain traffic rules, are you not? When you pull up at a stop sign or a red light, do you sit there and go, you know what? I don't really feel like waiting for the light to turn green. I think I'm just going to go ahead and go. And it doesn't matter that there's all these other cars out here at this intersection. I don't feel like waiting, so I'm just not going to wait. Well, there are people who do that, right? But again, does society not function on the premise that we need to follow those kinds of rules? Because what happens if we don't? Well, we have chaos. If everybody decides that they're going to ignore those traffic lights and they're just going to keep on going, what are we going to have? We're going to have a lot of collisions, crashing, right? Of vehicles and, serious accidents. So those rules are there, of course, to keep us safe, to protect us. And we voluntarily submit to them because we know that without them, there would be chaos and confusion and anarchy. So our society, our communities function out of necessity on us being willing to voluntarily yield ourselves, yield to other people's expertise, yield to other people's perspectives, yield to other people's authority. And yes, that sometimes means, of course, being obedient to rules and laws. If I go to another country, I have to follow that country's rules. I have to submit to their authority. I have to show up at the airport with a passport or they won't let me in. I can't just say, I want to go, and no, I don't have a passport, so just let me in. Okay, it just doesn't work that way. So let's talk about this whole concept now in a relationship, in a romantic relationship, in a marriage, in a partnership. As Christians, we understand maybe better than anybody else that submission is voluntary and that above all, we are supposed to submit ourselves to God. We submit to God when we ask for God's will to be done in our lives. Now, we might ask for that, but not really mean it, but that's a whole nother topic, right? But the premise behind being Christian is that we want to be directed by God's will in our lives. So when God says, submit ourselves to each other, because it does say that, and then wives submit ourselves to husbands, is God saying husbands are more important than wives? Wives, you are unequal. You don't matter as much to me, so I've made your husband the boss over you. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that everything has to function in a certain way. We submit ourselves to each other because that's how everything functions best. In a marriage, the idea of submission goes hand in hand with the concept of leadership. It's a symbiotic relationship. And when it's done correctly, it's a beautiful thing. Let me explain it best using this metaphor of flying a plane. You have a pilot and you have a co-pilot. And in the cockpit, they work together to get that plane off the ground, into the air, flying smoothly, and then ultimately landing safely. Do they not? And the entire safety of everybody on board that plane relies on that symbiotic relationship between the two people in that cockpit. It is a partnership. They ideally are not up there in the cockpit arguing over who gets to be the boss, who's in charge, who gets to do certain things, and you, why do you get to do that? You're not better than me. No, they each have their roles and responsibilities, and those roles blend together. When a partnership is based on a loving leader and a respectful co-pilot, a loving pilot and a respectful co-pilot, then we've got harmony, then we've got unity. But if we've got somebody lording it over the other person, throwing their weight around, being inconsiderate, thoughtless, unkind, authoritarian, a dictator in the relationship, then the person who's in the co-pilot role isn't going to feel very great about her position, is she? She's not going to look up to or admire her pilot. She's not going to value his input. She's not going to want to willingly submit to his role, as the pilot in this situation. If there's any sort of abuse of power, okay? And one of the reasons why we don't like this word anymore in our society is because historically we've had a lot of that sort of abuse of power, haven't we? Where the pilot, okay, the man, the husband, has been very authoritarian and even abusive. And we do still sometimes see this today. So, small caveat, I'm not talking about women submitting to that, okay? I'm definitely not saying that women should submit to verbal or physical or emotional or sexual abuse. We're not talking about that. We're talking about voluntarily recognizing the blending of two roles. And that when, again, this is done right, it's so beautiful. In 30 plus years of working with women, I've never heard, not one time, have I heard a woman say, I just love being in charge in my marriage. I love being the boss. I love wearing the pants. I hate it when my husband makes any decisions at all. I just wish he would stop even trying to make all decisions. Just let me do it all. And, he's really just an accessory. So as long as he's here and around to, meet my wants and needs, bring home some money, that's nice. Help out around the house, help out with the kids, but let me be the boss, then I'm happy. You know what? I've never, ever heard a woman say that. You know what instead I hear from women? I wish I could look up to my husband. I wish that I could respect him. I wish that he would make decisions so that I don't have to make all of the decisions. I don't like having all this pressure on my plate to make decisions. I wish he would step up and take charge and take some of this responsibility off of me. That's what I hear women say. Now, do we always do a good job as women letting our husbands do that? No, we don't. And there are reasons for that. But again, that's a conversation for another day. The question that I want us to ask ourselves as women is, do I voluntarily cooperate? Do I voluntarily give in? Do I yield? Do I submit? Knowing that only one person can fly this plane. Okay? I'm the co-pilot. I'm right beside my partner. It takes two, but ultimately somebody has to be responsible. Ultimately responsible. Somebody has to make the ultimate decisions in the relationship. Again, I've never met a woman who really wanted all the pressure of being the one to be ultimately responsible. So submitting doesn't have to be a dirty word. Not when you're married to somebody who is a great leader, who is kind and considerate. I love submitting to my husband because my husband values my opinion. My husband doesn't just unilaterally go out and make his own decisions. He comes to me and says, Debbie, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? He knows that I have a different perspective in how I see things, how I see the world, and that God intended both our perspectives to be used in a marriage. So he wants my opinion. Now, I have a role and a responsibility to not just, hammer my opinion, like you need to do it my way, because that's not useful either. I don't want to take advantage of my husband asking me my opinion. I want to give him and I want to create opportunities for him to be able to make decisions. Even simple things like, where do you want to go out to eat tonight? If I say, I don't really care, you decide. And so then he decides and I go, well, why did you do that? I didn't really want to eat that. That was dumb. Then what have I actually created in that situation, right? I've created a situation where I don't trust him to make a decision, or I say I do, but then I said I'd take it back, right? With the way that I handled that. So voluntarily yielding, voluntarily submitting to him means first giving him the opportunity to make decisions and then going along with them. But that works best when you're married to somebody who is seeking out your thoughts on different situations, who is considerate, who pays attention to you, who is kind, who is loving. That's why the Bible, when it talks about submitting, says, husbands, love your wives like Jesus loved the church. Well, how did Jesus show love? He did it by serving, didn't he? And ultimately by sacrificing his own life. So when a husband treats his wife in that way, it's not hard for a woman to look up to and admire and respect her husband's leadership. It also says, husbands, love your wives as you love your own body, which means, again, not lording it over her, not being all masterful and domineering and authoritarian, but again, recognizing that each of us brings really two different perspectives, that we are two halves of a whole, and that we are both made in God's image, which means that we reflect characteristics, both of us, that are of God. And it takes two of those perspectives, both of those perspectives, to complete us. So I want you to think of that flying the plane metaphor when it comes to submitting in a relationship. Let's maybe take the whole idea of submitting being a bad thing out, and let's actually look at submitting as something that can potentially be not only crucial and essential to a relationship, but actually beautiful. When you create this reciprocity in a marriage between a husband and a wife, there's nothing better. Honestly, nothing better.